Hello, my friend. Tonight we embark on a journey through time, from the thunderous prophecies reverberating in the Staunton log cabin to the red brick roads stretching from Missouri to Oregon. These tales are not mere history. They pulse with the heartbeat of courage, dreams, and the legacies that have shaped America. From the Shenandoah Valley to the Nebraska prairies, we'll encounter those who dared to speak, dared to step forward, and dared to leave footprints for posterity. So, before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, only if you truly appreciate what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from: Richmond, Portland, or somewhere else. What time is it where you are? It's thrilling to see who's tuning in from across the globe. Now, dim the lights, perhaps switch on a fan for a gentle hum. And together, let's step into tonight's journey, where every story is a flame waiting to be ignited. In 1848, smoke billowed like black serpents coiling around the central square of New Canaan, a small town nestled beneath the Adirondack foothills of New York. The fire showed no mercy, licking at wooden rooftops, devouring storefronts, and leaving behind the old church, the town's once beating heart, as nothing but a heap of ashes. The townspeople stood in stunned silence, their clothes pungent with smoke, eyes reddened as they watched their pride vanish. Yet, amid the ruins, a man emerged, his coat tattered, but his gaze ablaze with an unquenched fire. He was Thaddeus Kane, not the mayor, not the preacher, but a wealthy merchant with dreams taller than the mountain behind him. Thaddeus did not see rubble. He saw opportunity, a blank canvas on which to paint something extraordinary. He intended to erect not just a house of worship, but a monument, a declaration that New Canaan was more than a dot on the map. It was the epicenter of a new American dream. He called it the Holy Canaan Dome, a structure that would humble the grandest churches of Boston and Philadelphia, not for silent prayer, but to shout to the world that here, amid dense forests and frozen stone, divinity touched the earth. To bring this vision to life, Thaddeus enlisted two brilliant minds: Clara Merton, an eccentric mathematician from Albany who could calculate the curve of the wind with a pencil, and Elias Holt, an engineer from Syracuse who had built bridges over the fiercest rivers. They were not architects in the traditional sense, but pioneers, individuals who saw in numbers and steel a grander story. Together, they sketched a daring design, a colossal dome, as if the sky itself were captive, suspended on granite pillars quarried from Vermont. Light would pour through dozens of stained glass panels, each telling a tale of land, people, and faith. Work commenced amid hammer strikes and sweat. Granite hauled from Vermont along muddy roads, steel glinting like industrial dreams shipped by horse-drawn wagon from Pittsburgh. Craftsmen converging from across the region, bearing gold leaf, pearls from the Maine coast, and oak from the Hudson Valley. Each stone, each pane of glass, embodied a promise. In just 4 years, a marvel for such an ambitious undertaking, the Holy Canaan Dome stood complete, its vault shimmering under sunlight like a gemstone in the wilderness. On opening day, Thaddeus entered in a brand-new coat, head held high. As light cascaded through the glass, transforming the stone floor into a living tapestry, he whispered, voice trembling, "We have done it. We have touched eternity." The dome was more than a church. It was New Canaan's soul, the banner of a small town daring to dream big. To its people, it was more than a place to pray. It was proof they were chosen, that their humble town was part of something far greater. Yet history, like the wind across the Adirondacks, never remained still. The dome came alive, breathing with those who crossed its threshold. Beneath its vault, the world's clamor faded. The air was cool, redolent of beeswax and polished wood. Colored light danced on the walls, narrating the stories of pioneers, rivers, and undying dreams. The vault, spanning over 100 feet, appeared to float, as if upheld by faith itself. The stone walls gleamed with natural veins, blue from Maine quarries, deep red from Pennsylvania. The floor formed a stone mosaic, carved with geometric patterns leading the eye to the center where light pooled like molten gold. Granite columns, sourced from ancient Ohio quarries, stood like silent giants bearing the weight of time. This space was not only beautiful, it was sacred, as though heaven and earth converged here. The Holy Canaan Dome swiftly became New Canaan's heartbeat. Candlelit services with choirs singing anthems that resonated through the air. Murals of saints and settlers sparkling as portals to another world. To stand beneath the dome was to feel small, yet uplifted, cradled by something larger than oneself. It was more than a building. It was a promise, a reminder that even in the darkest days, light finds its way. But even the brightest light cannot banish approaching darkness. A century later, in 1912, the first cracks appeared in the stone walls, not wrought by nature, but by human hands. A group of strangers, calling themselves reformers from Rochester, arrived bearing the torch of change. They came not to pray, but to seize. And the Holy Dome, the very symbol of faith, was about to face its greatest trial. Stepping into the Holy Canaan Dome, you feel as though you've entered another world. The winds howl through the Adirondacks, the creaking of wheels on the dirt road outside, all of it vanishes. Only silence remains, cool as the breath of an ancient forest. The air carries the faint scent of beeswax and incense. It wraps around you like a silken shawl. Nearly 50 years have passed since Thaddeus Kane erected this marvel in New Canaan, New York, back in 1848. Now, in the 1890s, the Holy Dome is more than a church. It is the town's lifeblood, where dreams, fears, and prayers entwine. The dome, vast as a captive sky, hovers on granite pillars as if to defy gravity. Light streams through 60 stained glass panels, each one a story of pioneers crossing mountains, of rivers glinting beneath moonlight. The colors cascade onto the stone floor like a waterfall of gold. The walls, clad in Hudson Valley sandstone, glimmer with natural veins. They seem to whisper the earth's secrets. Blue stone from Maine, crimson from Pennsylvania, all fuse into a silent symphony. The marble floor, etched with swirling patterns, guides you to the center, where light converges, brilliant as a promise. For the people of New Canaan, the Holy Dome is more than a place of worship. It is where meaning is found. Each Sunday morning, families arrive in threadbare coats, hands calloused from toil. Yet their eyes shine as they cross the wooden threshold. The choir's voices, clear as mountain springs, lift hymns that spiral up to the dome, merging with light as if heaven itself responds. Children, perched on pews, gaze at murals of settlers braving harsh winters. They imagine themselves part of that story. Elders, clutching Bibles with trembling hands, find solace in the hush, the dome's stone arms cradling their years. But the holy dome is not reserved for quiet reflection. It is the seat of power, where town leaders rise not only to pray, but to shape the future. When a new mayor is sworn beneath the vault, colored light crowns him invisibly. His voice, echoing through the space, becomes more than a man's. It embodies New Canaan, the flame Thaddeus Kane ignited. Grand festivals transform the dome into a living canvas, candles ablaze, Adirondack wildflowers woven into wreaths, songs that vibrate the very stone. The murals, saints and settlers alike, shine as portals to another realm, where past and future intertwine. Yet even light cannot hold back the gathering dark. In 1912, a strange wind swept through New Canaan, not from the mountains, but from distant cities like Rochester. A group calling themselves the League of Liberty arrived, bearing ideas sharp as blades. They came not to marvel at the dome, but to erase it, to condemn it as a relic of a backward past. In their eyes, stained glass was not sacred. It was a shackle. Their assault descended like a storm. For 3 days, these strangers rode into the square and stormed the holy dome with hammers and ropes. They shattered the glass panels, raining shards of yellow light onto the floor. They upended the altar, cast burning candles to the ground. Smoke blackened the murals. One among them, eyes blazing like a torch, stood at the pulpit, hurling curses. "This is no church. This is the grave of dead dreams." Outside, New Canaan's people grasped each other's hands. Silent tears fell. The sound of breaking glass, of wood splintering, of hissing smoke. Each strike felt like a knife to their hearts. For nearly 60 years, the Holy Dome was no longer New Canaan's. Occupied by outsiders, it became a hall for strange new ideas. The murals were whitewashed, as though memory could be wiped away. The space that once echoed hymns now rang with arguments and the clatter of hobnail boots. Yet the dome, though wounded, stood firm. Stone does not weep, but it remembers. And within the townspeople, Thaddeus Kane's fire never died. In 1971, led by Abigail Wren, a weaver from the town, residents rose to reclaim the Holy Dome. Armed not with weapons, but with faith and brooms, they swept away the debris of oblivion. Beneath the lime wash, they uncovered the murals, gleaming like reborn dreams. They scrubbed away the soot, replaced broken glass, relit the candles. The dome came back to life, yet it was not the same. It bore its scars, memories of betrayal, of days when light was extinguished. Abigail, standing beneath the vault, watched new light pour through restored panes. She whispered, "We do not rebuild, we retell." The Holy Dome became a new story, not only of faith, but of resilience. Yet, even as light returned, darkness lurked. From the south, from cities like Albany, A new tide approached. Not torches, but ideas stronger than any flame. And the holy dome, having endured so much, prepared to face its greatest challenge yet, not in stone, but in spirit. In the spring of 1975, New Canaan trembled, not from the Adirondack winds, but from the footsteps of a procession arriving from Albany. They bore no torches or sledgehammers like the Vandals of old, but something more perilous. The promise of a new future, sharp as a silver blade. Leading them was Isaiah Bell, a young evangelist from Syracuse, his eyes fiery, his voice as sweet as honey flowing over stone. He had not come to destroy the holy Canaan dome. He came to claim it, to transform it into the banner of a new movement, a declaration that the age of old dreams was over. The sky above New Canaan lay silent, yet the ground shook beneath the weight of hundreds draped in white robes. They carried unfamiliar hymns, nothing like the sacred chants once raised under the vault. The townspeople, gathered at the roadside, clasped hands, hearts heavy. They recalled the dark days of 1912, when the dome was seized, and feared history repeating itself. Yet Isaiah gave no command to demolish. He stepped inside the dome, his polished leather shoes barely whispering on the stone floor, and looked up at the vault as if it already belonged to him. In that moment, the sacred space, bathed in colored light, felt strangely alien. Isaiah stood beneath the dome. His voice rang out, not a prayer, but a summons. "This is not merely a church," he proclaimed, his words rolling like thunder. "This is the lighthouse of a new world." He decreed the holy dome become the center of the Moonlight movement, a community of truth-seekers melding faith, philosophy, and the dream of a borderless society. Outside, New Canaan's people heard new songs rise, not hymns, but soaring melodies like wind over Lake Champlain on a moonless night. The transformation was quiet, yet profound. The pioneer murals, once the dome's very soul, were hidden behind white silk drapes, not destroyed, but concealed like imprisoned dreams. The oak altar was dismantled, replaced by a simple stone block carved with crescent moon symbols. Hudson Valley woolen rugs softened the steps of newcomers. Outside, 4 slender bell towers, modeled on Catskill hills, sprang up at each corner, reaching skyward like fingers. New bells rang out, not to call the faithful, but to herald a new era. But the dome was not dead. It merely donned new robes. Isaiah and his followers did not shatter stone or glass. They revered it as heirs of an ancient treasure. Moonlight rituals filled the space, candles ablaze, incense drifting, and chants rippling like waves. Devotees from across New York and into Pennsylvania converged, bearing wild flowers and scrolls of philosophy. The dome now stood at the heart of a new dream, not just New Canaan's church, but the flame of a movement spreading like moonlight over Lake Erie. For New Canaan's people, this change was a wound. They watched outsiders rename it the Moonlight Temple, hearts laden with loss. They remembered the sacred hymns and the tales told in colored light. Yet they could not deny that the dome endured. It was neither destroyed nor forgotten. It had become a new symbol, a mirror reflecting seekers' dreams. The hidden murals lay asleep behind their drapes, like souls awaiting awakening. The stained glass panels still glittered, spinning a new story, not of old faith, but of hope and transformation. Isaiah, now called the guide, prayed beneath the vault, not with a Bible, but with books of philosophy and teachings of peace and freedom. He did not erase the past. He built upon it. The bell towers, their chimes ringing, became New Canaan's emblem, drawing travelers from Buffalo, Rochester, even as far as Chicago. They came not to pray, but to listen, to seek, to dream. The dome, now the Moonlight Temple, was more than a structure. It was a promise, a reminder that even as the world shifts, stone stands firm and light finds its way. Yet stone, however steadfast, cannot quell the tremors beneath. New Canaan, nestled by rivers and mountains, has always known quaking ground. The great dome began to groan. Tiny fissures appeared in the walls, not from war or flame, but from the earth itself stirring. The dome's weight, though devised by Clara Merton and Elias Holt, pressed down on the granite pillars. Even a town accustomed to change grew anxious. Would the Moonlight Temple withstand this new trial? Isaiah, standing beneath the vault, surveyed the cracks without fear. He summoned Miriam Cole, an engineer from Ithaca, reputed to hear the earth breathe. Miriam was no ordinary architect. She was an artist, a pioneer who saw in stone and steel not just structure, but soul. She entered the temple clutching her plans, eyes bright as the moon. "This is more than mere rock," she said softly. "It is a story, and we must keep that story alive." Miriam reinforced the dome, concealing steel supports from Pittsburgh behind the stone so as not to mar its beauty. She studied Clara and Elias's original design, not to alter, but to uplift. She added new motifs inspired by the Hudson River, etched into the pillars as a reminder that past and future can coexist. Under her care, the Moonlight Temple not only survived, it grew stronger, ready to face the earth's tremors. Visitors from afar penned accounts of wonder. They stood beneath the dome, embraced by silence, as if time stood still. They watched colored light dance, heard the bells from the towers, and sensed something greater than themselves. The Moonlight Temple was more than a building. It was a mirror reflecting the dreams of New Canaan, of Isaiah, of Miriam, of all who crossed its threshold. Yet dreams, however radiant, cannot remain static. A new wave from cities like Albany was on its way, and the Moonlight Temple, with all its light and stone, was about to confront an even greater question. Would it forever remain a lighthouse, or become just another memory under the moon? One early morning in 1983, when mist still coiled around the Adirondack Hills like silken white threads, a rumble rose from the earth beneath New Canaan, New York, not thunder, nor the clip-clop of horse-drawn wheels on the dirt road. It was Mother Earth's sigh, a gentle tremor just strong enough to drop dry leaves and hush the birds. Townspeople, tending fires or drawing water from the well, paused, hands trembling, eyes fixed on the Moonlight Temple, formerly the Holy Canaan Dome. The vast dome, once Thaddeus Kane's pride, stood silent, yet far from motionless. A hairline crack, long as a whisper, appeared in the sandstone wall, a warning from the depths. New Canaan knew well the earth's quakes. Nestled between rivers and mountains, the town had grown accustomed to nature's jolts. But the Moonlight Temple, with its sky-captive dome, was not built to tremble. Its weight, though meticulously calculated by Clara Merton and Elias Holt over a century before, now pressed down on the granite pillars, making them groan in the quiet. Followers of the Moonlight movement, clad in white robes, gathered in the courtyard. Anxious glances passed among them. The bells in the new towers, once chiming hope, now tolled offbeat, as if the earth itself were singing a different song. Yet the Moonlight Temple was no fragile edifice. Its guardians, led by Miriam Cole, an engineer from Ithaca, refused to let stone wail in despair. Miriam, her silver hair neatly bound and eyes sharp as razors, entered the sacred space clutching an old leather notebook where she'd recorded the secrets of stone and steel. She was more than an engineer. She was a listener, able to feel the earth's heartbeat through her calloused hands. "This is more than a structure," she said, voice deep as the Hudson River. "It is a story, and this story is not over." Miriam set to work, not merely to repair, but to revive. She summoned craftsmen from afar, stonemasons from Vermont, blacksmiths from Pittsburgh, and glass artisans from Corning. They did more than labor. They retold the temple's tale in every hammer's ring, in every pane of glass. Miriam reinforced the pillars with new steel, hidden behind the stone to preserve its ancient beauty. She carved fresh motifs inspired by Adirondack rivers and forests, a reminder that this monument belonged not only to humanity, but to the earth itself. The white silk drapes that once concealed the pioneer murals were drawn back, revealing images faded yet vibrant, as though long slumbering dreams had awoken. Under Miriam's hands, the Moonlight Temple did more than endure. It grew stronger, like a scarred warrior who has never fallen. The moonlight rituals continued, now infused with new breath. Incense swirled among shafts of colored light, cast like shattered rainbows. The hymns, once soaring like night winds, now rang deeper, more resonant, as if sung in unison with the earth. New Canaan's residents, though still wary of the movement, began to return, not to join, but to marvel. They stood beneath the dome, felt its stillness, and recognized that the Moonlight Temple, despite its new name, remained their holy dome. Travelers from Buffalo to Boston flocked here, notebooks and cameras in hand. They wrote of the temple as a wonder, not merely for its dome or stained glass, but because it stood as witness to the fires of 1848, to the hammers of 1912, and now to the earth's tremors. It was more than stone. It was memory, a book written in light and cracks. The bell towers, soaring like Catskill peaks, sang each morning, not just to call the faithful, but to remind all that time may wear down stone, but cannot erase its story. Yet time, like the Hudson itself, never ceases to flow. By 1995, a new tide surged upon New Canaan, not of earth or fire, but of distant ideas. A group of scholars from Albany, led by Eleanor Vance, proposed boldly, transform the Moonlight Temple into a neutral space, belonging to no movement or faith, but serving as a museum, a safeguard for New Canaan's collective memory and beyond. The suggestion was like hurling a boulder into a still lake, rippling through the entire town. Could the temple surrender its soul once more? Or would it forever blaze as a torch, shining defiantly against every gust? When dawn broke over the Adirondacks in 1996, New Canaan, New York, awoke in a silent fever. It was not the bells of the Moonlight Temple Tower ringing. It was whispers carried along the dirt roads, from the blacksmith's forge to the riverside fish market. Eleanor Vance, a scholar from Albany, salt and pepper hair and a voice as soft as morning mist. She had kindled a new flame. Her proposal was neither to destroy nor to seize the Moonlight Temple. It was to rebirth it. No longer the heart of the Moonlight movement, no longer the pioneer's church, but a space for all, a museum where New Canaan's and the world's memories intertwined, where stone would tell its stories not to one people, but to every soul who set foot inside. Her idea, like a breeze over Lake Champlain, sent the town reeling. The Moonlight adherents, once cloaked in bright white robes, now faded, gathered in the courtyard, clutching their scrolls of philosophy, fear in their eyes that their lighthouse would vanish. The people of New Canaan, still remembering the hymns that once rang from Thaddeus Kane's era, stood silently by the wooden fence, hearts torn between hope and doubt. Could the Moonlight Temple become a place belonging to no one, yet to everyone? Eleanor, a gentle smile like starlight, stepped into the sacred hall, leather-bound notebook in hand, where she had recorded dreams of a harmonious world. The transformation began, not with fanfare, but as quietly as the Hudson River flowing at night. In 1997, the Moonlight Temple was officially reborn as the Canaan Memory Museum. The white silk drapes that once hid the pioneer murals were removed, revealing images faded yet brilliant. Settlers crossing mountains, rivers glittering by moonlight. Alongside them, Rochester artisans painted new scenes. Immigrants from Buffalo, miners from Pennsylvania, fishermen from Maine. Each wall became a book, each brushstroke a story. Symbols of the Moonlight movement, the crescent moons carved on the stone lectern, were not erased. Instead, they stood beside new emblems: the star from the American flag, wildflowers from the Adirondacks, circles symbolizing unity. The floor, once carpeted in wool, was replaced with Vermont marble, etched with inscriptions of New Canaan's history: the fire of 1848, the hammer blows of 1912, the tremor of 1983. The dome, still proud as a captive sky, welcomed light through its stained glass, now telling a grander tale of those who came, those who left, and those who left their footprints on this land. The museum was more than a repository. It was an invitation. Visitors from Syracuse to Boston flocked here, cameras and notebooks in hand. They passed through the oak doors, felt the chill of the stone, stood in hushed awe beneath the vault, where colored light danced like falling stars. They read the inscriptions underfoot, traced the murals with their fingers, and listened as New Canaan locals, from weavers to blacksmiths, recounted the past. This space belonged to no single faith or movement. It was a mirror reflecting the dreams, the pain, and the hopes of everyone who had ever called New Canaan home. Scholars, led by Eleanor, held seminars beneath the dome, where pioneer tales, immigrant stories, and the Moonlight Movement were retold, not to debate, but to understand. School children, pencils in hand, sat on wooden benches, sketching the murals as if they were portals to another world. Elders, eyes dim yet bright within, came to reclaim memories, to recall the days when hymns rang out. The Canaan Memory Museum was more than a structure. It was a heartbeat, a reminder that history is not division, but layers of memory piled like stones beneath a river's flow. Yet even the most sacred spaces cannot escape new winds. In 2020, an unexpected wave surged through New Canaan, not from Albany or Rochester, but from the town's very heart. A group led by Jonah Reed, a local carpenter, demanded that the Canaan Memory Museum resume its former role, a church where hymns could ring once more, as in Thaddeus Kane's day. Their plea, like lightning in a calm sky, sent shockwaves through the community. Some supported them, recalling when colored light spoke prayers. Others resisted, insisting the museum alone could embrace every story. Jonah, rough hands and resolute gaze, stood before the oak doors, voice as deep as a bell toll. This is not merely stone. This is our home. His words echoed, not only through New Canaan, but across newspapers and radio waves, reaching distant cities like Chicago. The world watched, waiting to see whether the Moonlight Temple, now the Canaan Memory Museum, would transform once more or remain forever a mirror to every soul. Would it sing the old hymns again, or stay a book, open to all who dared to read? At dawn on July 15, 2020, New Canaan, New York, awoke in a storm without thunder. Not the Adirondack winds, nor Champlain's rain, but a verdict from Albany's court, sharp as a blade cutting through the morning mist. The Canaan Memory Museum, the name the Moonlight Temple, or once the Holy Canaan Dome, had carried for over 2 decades, would no longer stand as a neutral space. The ruling declared its conversion into a museum in 1997 unlawful, and the structure must return to its original purpose. A church where hymns could soar once more as in Thaddeus Kane's era. News spread like wildfire, from the Riverside Forge to the square's cafes, igniting every whispered corner of town. Jonah Reed, a tall carpenter with salt and pepper hair and hands etched with wood scars, stood before the oak doors. He gripped a hammer not to destroy, but to build. He led the movement to restore the dome, and in a voice resonant as a bronze bell, he told the gathered crowd, "This place is more than stone. It is our heart." His words, simple yet weighty as the mountains, carried through microphones, through radio waves, reaching Rochester, Buffalo, and beyond. The world watched New Canaan's ancient edifice teeter on history's edge. The transformation unfolded swiftly, yet without fanfare. Mere hours after the verdict, Jonah and New Canaan's people entered the sacred hall, bearing candles, Bibles, and long silent hymns. The marble floor's inscriptions, honoring immigrants and the Moonlight Movement, remained intact, now layered with Hudson Valley rugs, soft as prayer. Murals of pioneers and fishermen were uncovered, yet during services they were veiled by white linen drapes, not to erase them, but to honor them. Light from the stained glass, once dancing like falling stars, now blazed like a flame of faith, bathing the knees of those who knelt beneath the vault. For the first time in decades, the 4 Catskill-inspired bell towers rang out, not the songs of moonlight, but the church's call. New Canaan's people, from blacksmith to weaver, gathered, voices trembling yet alive, singing ancient hymns like the Hudson River swelling after rain. To them, it was a resurrection, a homecoming as sure as a bird finding its nest after the storm. Yet not all hearts joined the chorus. Those who had loved the Canaan Memory Museum, from Albany scholars to Boston visitors, stood outside, heavy with sorrow. They saw the ruling as a step backward, a fracture in the dream of a space for all. Debate raged, not only in New Canaan, but across America, from the New York Times to online forums ablaze with opinion. Some hailed the dome's return as a triumph of tradition, of the faith that had first ignited the town in 1848. Others, like Eleanor Vance, now aged, hair as white as Adirondack snow, penned open letters, arguing that the museum alone could embrace every story. Pioneer, immigrant, and moonlight believer alike. It should belong to humanity, not a single group, she wrote. Her gentle voice still carried far, touching hearts in Syracuse, Chicago, and beyond. Yet the dome, as ever, stood silent amid the storm. Stone does not argue. Stained glass does not judge. Services resumed, candles aflame, hymns echoing. But its doors remained open. Visitors, from Rochester to coastal Maine, continued to come, not solely to pray, but to marvel. They passed through the threshold, felt the chill of stone, and stood beneath the vault where light spoke of fire, of hammers, of tremors. Guides, now New Canaan locals, recounted the tales of Thaddeus Kane, of Isaiah Bell, of Miriam Cole, as if they were characters in an ancient tome. The dome became all things: church, museum, lighthouse, memory. It stood beneath New Canaan's stars, unshaken, bearing the scars of the 1848 blaze, the 1912 blows, the 1983 quake, and the 2020 dispute. It belongs to no single era, no single faith, no single dream. It belongs to those brave enough to enter, brave enough to listen. Jonah Reed, standing beneath the vault, watched the light dance across his hands and whispered, "It never falls. It only sings." Yet no song, however beautiful, can soothe every heart. A new wave, silent yet strong, was rising from New Canaan itself. A group of young people, led by Lila Morse, refused to see the dome as merely church or museum. They dreamed of something larger, a space where every story, old and new, could rise in unison. Could the dome evolve once more, or would it forever blaze as a torch on the razor's edge of past and future? In the oak-paneled study of a Concord, Massachusetts home in 1845, a 12-year-old boy crouched beneath the desk, his hands smeared with dust, his eyes glowing like a secret candle. Samuel Harrow was neither a star pupil, nor the village school's pride, nor the light in his father's eyes. a distinguished Boston physician. Yet, in that shadowed nook amid fallen books and torn scraps of paper, he discovered his own kingdom. A beetle, its shell shimmering like a pearl fragment crawling through the wood grain. Samuel ignored his father's calls from the parlor. He cared not for unfinished arithmetic. All he saw was that tiny marvel, a secret the world had never told. Born into wealth, his grandfather, a poet of Lexington's fields, Samuel grew up surrounded by expectations and textbooks, yet the dry lines of print could not hold him. He preferred the hidden corners of his family's library, where sketchbooks of birds and trees lay forgotten. He collected stones along the Charles River, dissected insects with his folding knife, and jotted notes on scraps, his scrawl fervent with passion. Why do sparrow wings differ? A question he dared to ask, unanswered. His father, Dr. William Harrow, watched with thinly veiled disappointment. "A doctor must not dream," he snapped, voice as sharp as a scalpel. At 16, Samuel was sent to Harvard, his father's hope to mold him into the heir apparent. But amid the cold lecture halls, he felt suffocated. Anatomy lectures lulled him to sleep. The sting of antiseptics made him wince. He skipped classes to wander small museums among bird skeletons and White Mountains fossils. There he met others like himself, the curious, the undeterred by unanswered textbook questions. Seeing his son spurn medicine, Dr. Harrow enrolled him in a Concord seminary, aiming to steer him toward the pulpit, a respectable path for a nonconformist youth. Yet it was here that Samuel found his spark anew. Theology lectures, though dry, led him to naturalist writings. Ministers wrote of creation's perfection as proof of the divine. Samuel cared little for divinity. He cared for the world. He collected beetles obsessively, sketched them in his journal, noted every detail: harder elytra, brighter hues, longer legs, each beetle a puzzle, each puzzle a door. Samuel's life might have continued in this quiet passion, journals and small dreams, if not for a letter. In autumn 1862, newly turned 22, an envelope arrived from Boston, sealed in red, the handwriting precise. Inside lay an invitation from Captain Amos Creed of the schooner Starling, preparing a coastal voyage from Maine to the Gulf of Mexico. They needed a naturalist, not the best, but the willing. Samuel was neither choice nor sure. He was young, inexperienced, and prone to tilt his head in thought, a habit that made his father frown. Yet Amos, through a Harvard acquaintance, had heard of the Beetle Boy. "Do you dare?" the letter challenged. Samuel stood in the study, the letter trembling in his hand, his heart hammering like wood upon hull. He glanced through the window at his childhood home, where his father penned letters to patients. He thought of beetles under the desk, of journals brimming with questions, of long Concord days when the world felt too small. He knew not the journey's length, nor his strength, but he knew this: to stay was to remain the boy beneath the desk, forever dreaming of locked doors. He penned his reply in a single line: "I will go." That quiet stroke of ink would change not only Samuel Harrow's fate, but the world's way of seeing it. In December 1862, the Starling weighed anchor in Portland, Maine. Samuel stood on deck, a knapsack loaded with journals and a glass vial holding his favorite beetle. The voyage promised 2 years. Destiny had other plans. Samuel did not merely board a ship, he embarked on a journey that would make the world pause to listen. But the voyage proved no gentle course. The Starling was more than a vessel. It was a crucible where Samuel would face tempest waves, self-doubt, and himself. Could the boy who once dreamed beneath a desk find answers to questions greater than life? Or would he become lost amid the endless sea and its silent mysteries? When the schooner Starling slipped out of Portland, Maine on a winter's day in 1862, Samuel Harrow stood on deck, his coat worn at the shoulders, his hands gripping the wooden rail as if afraid the sea might swallow him whole. The tang of salt and pine resin clung to the air. The waves thumped against the hull like a giant's heartbeat. Samuel, 22 years old, neither sailor nor famous scientist, was merely a boy from Concord, burdened with a satchel of notebooks and a glass vial cradling his favorite beetle. The voyage, slated for 2 years to chart America's coastline from Maine to the Gulf of Mexico, was a challenge. But for Samuel, it was a gateway to a world far larger than the oak underside of his childhood desk. The Starling was no placid vessel. She pitched through the Atlantic swells off Cape Cod, her deck creaking beneath a slate sky. Samuel, pale with seasickness, yet he clung to the rail, journal open, pencil trembling to record each motion. He paid no heed to Captain Amos Creed's charts or compass. He watched the gulls wheel overhead, their wings slicing the wind like razor blades. "Why do they fly differently?" he scribbled, his hand tilting with the ship's roll. Each bird, each wave, presented a new puzzle, and Samuel, with the curiosity of the boy who once dissected insects, could not cease seeking answers. The journey stretched not 2 years, but 5. From Maine's cragged shores, the Starling coasted past Chesapeake's busy ports, then into Georgia's brackish marshes. Samuel was more than a passenger. He was a hunter, of knowledge, not game. He gathered specimens with the zeal of an addict: Charleston shells, Key West shark vertebrae, Louisiana wading bird feathers. Each treasure was carefully stowed and shipped home to Boston in wooden crates, his notebooks bursting with sketches. "Wings here are longer," he noted beside a Virginia sparrow drawing. "Bones here are lighter," he wrote after slicing open a Gulf fish. Every harbor became Samuel's classroom. In Savannah, he marveled at mangroves whose roots wove like vast spider webs. In Mobile, he unearthed a strange fossil, vast, with bones eerily akin to creatures back in Concord. Are they related? He wondered, pen scrawling across salt, damp paper. Each observation was a puzzle piece. Each piece deepened his wonder. The world he once confined to his family library now revealed itself as immense, chaotic, and riddled with mystery. Yet not all wonders followed him. The Starling battled storms off the Outer Banks. Walls of water threatened to shred her timbers. Samuel, huddled in the hold, heard the ship's groans. He thought of his father in Boston, of the books he'd left unread. He survived. But he was no longer the dreamer beneath the desk. The sea had forged him, teaching that nature was not only beautiful, but merciless. In New Orleans, He witnessed slave markets, men in chains. Their haunted eyes lingered more painfully than any fossil. "Does nature choose who lives, who dies?" he wrote, for the first time, his faith tinged with doubt. It was in the Florida Keys that Samuel's world truly shifted. The tiny, radiant isles formed a maze of life. Each harbored sparrows, yet none alike. Sharper bills, shorter wings, brighter plumage. Samuel sat on sun-warmed sand, sketching them, his hand shaking not from the swell, but from a spark of understanding. "They change to survive," he wrote, his letters darker, bolder. He did not grasp its full import yet, but the thought, like a seed on fertile ground, took root in his mind. The voyage pressed on, through the Gulf, into Texas, where prairie stretched like waving grass seas. He met Louisiana tribes, listened to their tales of land and beast, stories absent from Harvard tomes. Every port, every specimen, reshaped him. He was no longer the head-tilting dreamer. He was a questioner, unafraid to upend his beliefs. When the Starling returned to Portland in 1867, Samuel disembarked, his satchel laden, but his mind far heavier. His journals, ink-smudged, sand-flecked, were no mere records. They were maps to a new world where birds, fish, and men appeared bound by invisible threads. Yet Samuel spoke little of it. He returned to Concord, entered the oak-walled room, and gazed beneath the desk where he first found that gleaming beetle. The world was now too vast, too intricate. The questions in his books, of sparrows, of fossils, of life itself, were no longer a boy's pastime. They had become a flame capable of consuming every conviction he'd ever held. Would Samuel dare to ignite that fire, or would he let it smolder in the darkness of his own soul? When Samuel Harrow stepped ashore in Portland, Maine, on a spring day in 1867, his shoes were scuffed. His coat still carried the tang of sea salt, yet his eyes burned like a lantern in the dark. 5 years aboard the Starling had transformed him, not into a stronger man, but into one burdened by unanswered questions. His satchel heavy, not merely with ink-stained, sand-flecked notebooks, but with mysteries gathered from Cape Cod's shores to Louisiana's marshes. Concord, Massachusetts, his home, remained unchanged. Oak frame houses, church bells, and his father's stern gaze. Dr. William Harrow. But Samuel was no longer the boy who hid beneath a desk with a beetle. He was a man standing at the threshold of a new world, a threshold more fearsome than any Atlantic gale. The family home in Concord, with its dusty shelves and the scent of dried ink, became Samuel's sanctuary. He unpacked wooden crates sent from the Starling, shells from Charleston, feathers from Key West, fossils from Mobile. Each specimen was a story, each story a fragment of a larger picture he could not yet discern. He spread his notebooks across the table, lines tilting, sketches of sparrows, fish, and foliage. "Why do they change?" he wrote beside a Florida Keys sparrow with a bill sharper than its Maine kin. "Why do ancient creatures resemble those of today?" That question, like a small flame, smoldered in his mind. Samuel spoke little. He knew these nascent thoughts, vague though they were dangerous. In Concord, where the church governed life, and his father believed all life immutable, Samuel's questions were heresy. He worked in silence, cataloging specimens, reporting on shells and birds for Boston's scientific societies. These dry, careful papers earned him a measure of renown. Harvard scholars, once dismissive of a dreamy boy, began inviting him to meetings. Yet Samuel kept his true notebooks, where he chronicled change and the struggle for life, locked in his desk drawer. On long nights, by the flicker of an oil lamp, Samuel read. A book from his grandfather's library, a Philadelphia economist's treatise, fell into his hands. It spoke of competition, of the strongest surviving when resources ran scarce. That idea, like lightning, illuminated Samuel's notes. He thought of Florida sparrows, their sharp bills cracking hard seeds, of Gulf sharks, their light bones propelling them swiftly through water. The fittest survive, he wrote, hand trembling, not from the cold. The thought was simple, yet terrifying. If nature selected who lived and who died, if life changed over time, then everything, from birds to humans, was not fixed, but a current shaped by survival and chance. Samuel did not rush to speak. He knew that, spoken aloud, this idea would shake Concord, Boston, and beyond. It challenged the church, challenged his father, challenged every belief he had known. He experimented not on the starling, but in his own garden. He bred pigeons, observed their breeding, noted each slight variation, brighter plumage, longer bills. He studied grasses from the Charles River bank, searching for traces of change. Each experiment laid another stone in a fortress of logic, yet added to his burden. "If I am right," he wrote in a notebook, "the world will not forgive me." Samuel's health began to falter. Headaches and sleepless nights arrived unbidden. He grew gaunt, his eyes sunken, yet the flame within him did not waver. He married Eliza Crane, a childhood friend from Concord, gentle yet resolute, who read his notebooks with curiosity tempered by concern. Eliza, devout, prayed for Samuel each night, not only for his health, but for his soul. "You walk a perilous path," she whispered, voice soft as rustling leaves. Samuel merely smiled, but inside he trembled, not for himself, but for her, afraid of wounding her, afraid of shattering the world Concord held dear. He confided in two trusted friends, Nathan Wells, a botanist from Salem, and Lydia Morse, a geologist from Worcester. They listened, eyes alight, yet warned him. "You need evidence," Nathan urged, "and you need time." Samuel nodded, but time, he knew, was not on his side. The idea in his mind, like a ship that had left the harbor, could not return. Night after night he wrote, constructing a theory page by page, line by line. Yet he dared not publish. He feared not critique, but the truth. If the world was not static, if humanity was part of nature's current, then Concord, the church, and he himself would find no place in that grand design. One evening, as the lamp guttered low, a letter arrived from Salem. Nathan Wells, in hurried script, wrote of a young naturalist in Philadelphia exploring ideas akin to Samuel's. Time, like the waves that buffeted the starling, was closing in. Would Samuel dare step into the light, or would he let his flame burn quietly, hidden in the darkness of his own making? In the oak-paneled room in Concord, Massachusetts, the oil lamp flickered like the breath of one fleeing through shadows. Samuel Harrow, now 28, sat at his desk. Ink-stained hands, hair tousled, eyes sunken like twin shallow wells. It was 1873, 6 years after returning from the Starling. He had become a silent silhouette, a man living among notebooks and ideas no one dared hear. The pages before him, covered in sparrow sketches, shells, and fossils, formed a fortress of logic, yet also a prison. The notion that life changed, that natural selection reigns, had taken root deep within him, yet he kept it locked away, as though it were a secret that could scorch all of Concord. Then came a letter, on a bitter winter's night, an envelope from Salem, Nathan Wells's hurried script slashing through the darkness. "You have no time," it read. "A man in Philadelphia, Caleb Finch, is speaking your thoughts. He will publish soon." Samuel's hand trembled as he read. The lamp guttered, threatening to die. Caleb Finch, a young naturalist who roamed Jersey's beaches, had seen what Samuel saw: life unfixed, flowing, shaped by competition and time. Samuel's private flame was no longer his alone. The room suddenly felt cramped. Samuel rose, stepped over scattered notebooks, peered into the blackness beyond the window. He thought of Eliza, his wife, sleeping next door, her prayers for his soul. He thought of his father, Dr. William Harrow, who would call these ideas heretical. He thought of Concord, with its Sunday services and church bells, where a single misstep could render him an outcast. Yet Nathan's letter, like the waves that once battered the Starling, offered no choice. If Caleb published first, Samuel's nights of insomnia and ink-lined pages would vanish like smoke. Samuel did not sleep that night. He sat, writing and tearing and writing again. He did not wish to outshine Caleb. He only wanted truth spoken, not as a cry, but as a lamp illuminating the world's dark corners. He contacted Nathan and Lydia Morse, a geologist from Worcester. They arranged a joint presentation at the Boston Scientific Society in spring 1873, where Samuel's and Caleb's ideas would appear side by side. In a drafty wooden hall, a sparse gathering of scholars, a few reporters, and his father's skeptical gaze from the back row. Samuel stood, voice quivering yet clear, speaking of Florida Keys sparrows, mobile fossils, and life's transformation over time. Caleb followed with equal passion, though a different tale. No applause came, but Samuel knew the door had opened. Afterward, Samuel pressed on. He wrote, not in haste, but with the precision of a craftsman carving wood. He condensed his Starling years and Concord's long nights into a single volume. He called it On the Origin of Life, not to assault, but to invite. It began simply, with his pigeon observations and Charles River plants, then widened like a river to the sea, exploring natural selection, adaptation, competition, and change. No magic, only time, pressure, and chance. It was beautiful, yet terrifying, like gazing into a mirror and seeing oneself as part of nature, not its master. The book was published on November 10, 1874, by a small Boston press. No fanfare, only a few copies sent to scientific societies in Salem, Philadelphia, and New York. But as it left Concord, it carried a blaze. Responses erupted like a storm. Boston newspapers dubbed it a visionary genius. Concord's ministers decried it as a curse. Harvard scholars debated, some lauded, some mocked. Editorial cartoons portrayed gaunt Samuel beside a giant sparrow. A question rippled across America. If life changes and humans are but part of nature, what becomes of faith, church, and the American dream? Samuel did not reply. He remained in Concord's oak room, letting the storm swirl around him. Eliza read the papers, hand trembling, yet held his each night. His father said nothing, only watched him with granite eyes. Samuel knew the debate had only begun, but he also knew this: truth, once ignited, cannot be extinguished. He had opened a door, and the world, willing or not, had stepped through. But where did that door lead? Samuel's ideas, like the sparrows he once sketched, flew far, to places he had never seen. Would they be embraced or driven away in an America changing faster than the pages of his notebooks? In the chill, wood-paneled hall of Boston in 1875, the light from wall lamps danced across furrowed brows. Samuel Harrow's book on the origin of life, published a year before, had become more than a book. It was a blaze, spreading from Salem's scientific societies to Concord's churches, from Philadelphia's taverns to New York's classrooms. Samuel, now 29, did not stand at the podium to defend it. He sat in his oak-paneled room in Concord, ink-stained hands, church bells drifting through the window like warnings. Yet beyond those walls, from cobblestone streets to printed pages, the world was shouting his name. The book's simple pages, about sparrows, pigeons, and life's change, shook America. In Boston, scholars gathered in smoke-filled rooms, debating natural selection as though it were a blade. Some, like Nathan Wells of Salem, hailed it as the key to nature's secrets. Samuel has mapped life itself, Nathan declared, eyes bright as oil lamps. But in Concord, ministers mounted pulpits, brandishing the book like a curse. "Harrow degrades humanity to mere beasts," one cried, voice echoing through wooden pews. Newspapers, from the Boston Globe to the New York Herald, ran caricatures of Samuel beside a giant sparrow, as if he were a madman daring to challenge God. The backlash went beyond words. In Worcester, a mob burned Samuel's books outside a church. Black smoke billowed like a warped prayer. In Philadelphia, Sunday sermons branded him traitor to faith. Even in Concord, his childhood home, once friendly neighbors now glared with granite coldness. His father, Dr. William Harrow, said nothing. His silence weighed more heavily than any accusation. Eliza, Samuel's wife, still held his hand each night, but her eyes, now anxious, betrayed fear, not only for Samuel, but for the world they once knew. Yet in that darkness, light also flickered. Young Harvard scientists, once mocking Samuel, began reading his work not for ridicule, but to learn. In Rochester, students formed the Harrow Circle, meeting to discuss life's change. In Chicago, a teacher quietly introduced Samuel's ideas to pupils, despite threats of dismissal. His theory, labeled heresy, explained too much, from Mobile's fossils to Florida Keys sparrows, from Charles River grasses to the tribes of Louisiana. It was not merely an idea, it was a mirror reflecting truths many refused to face. Samuel did not join the fray. He remained in Concord's Oak Room, writing more books, not to defend, but to expand. He wrote of Hudson Valley grasses and their struggle for light, of Gulf fishes adapting to currents. He claimed no certainty. He asked, he observed, he recorded. "Truth needs no shouting," he penned in a notebook, the script small as a whisper. Yet he was far from indifferent. Each critical article, each threatening letter, felt like a blade. He worried for Eliza, hands trembling as she read accusations. He worried for Concord, where church once felt like home, but had become a battleground. Friends like Nathan and Lydia Morse formed his shield. Nathan, with sharp tongue, defended him in Boston, calling Samuel's theory science's beacon. Lydia, unearthing fossils in Worcester, supplied fresh evidence. They did more than protect Samuel. They protected truth. Yet Samuel, though grateful, remained lonely. Each night he walked the dirt paths beside the Charles. He listened to the river. He thought of Florida Keys sparrows, of the questions that had led him here. He felt no regret, but he understood the cost. "Truth wounds before it heals," he wrote, the letters fading beneath the lamp's glow. Samuel sought not to wound. He did not wish to shatter churches or Eliza's faith. He only wished the world to look at nature as he did and see truth there. But the world would not yield easily. In Concord, a town meeting was called. Samuel was to explain himself before his neighbors. His father, for the first time, demanded, in a voice as stern as stone, "You owe them an answer." Samuel agreed, not to argue, but to speak. He stood before the crowd, not as a scientist, but as Concord's son, cherishing notebooks pressed to his heart. That meeting, beneath high-hung lanterns, would change everything. Could Samuel quell the storm, or would his words ignite a blaze that consumed all he held dear? In the dim glow of an evening in 1876, Samuel Harrow stood before the gathered townsfolk in Concord's wooden hall, empty-handed but for a battered leather notebook, its cover worn as it had been aboard the Starling. This community meeting, called to compel him to explain on the origin of life, was no trial. It was a crossroads. The people, from blacksmiths to weavers, filled every bench, their eyes flickering between doubt and curiosity. His father, Dr. William Harrow, sat in the front row, his face as hard as granite. Samuel spoke, voice low yet clear, not to argue, but to tell a story. He spoke of Florida Keys sparrows, of Mobile's fossils, of a world where life did not stand still, but flowed like the Charles River outside. When he finished, there was no applause, nor jeering, only a heavy silence, like an unspoken promise. Samuel left the hall neither triumphant nor defeated. He returned to his oak-paneled room, where the oil lamp still burned, and resumed his work. His book, once a contentious flame, was becoming a guiding torch. In Boston, lecture halls began to cite his name, not as a heretic, but as a pioneer. In Rochester, the Harrow Circle expanded, drawing eager students from Syracuse to Chicago. In Philadelphia, scientists, once skeptical, began testing his ideas, seeking evidence of natural selection in all living things. Samuel's theory was no longer a whisper in Concord. It was a song echoing down cobblestone streets and across wheat fields. Yet Samuel did not chase fame. He remained in Concord, living quietly with Eliza, his wife now accustomed to both threat-laden letters and glowing articles. They had 3 children, little lights in the wooden house, their laughter drowning out the church bells. Samuel wrote not for notoriety, but for understanding. He published further works, not just on sparrows or fossils, but on subtler wonders, how Hudson Valley grasses competed for sunlight, how Gulf fishes adapted to shifting currents. He explored not only competition, but cooperation, like bees and flowers in mutual harmony. "Nature is not merely a battlefield," he wrote, his script soft as light through a window. "It is a dance." His health remained fragile. Headaches arrived unbidden, yet Samuel pressed on. Each day he walked the dirt path by the Charles, his mirror lane, where he thought, wrote, and observed. He watched ants cross the sand, saw how they shared food, and recorded it as meticulously as he once sketched sparrows. He studied wildflowers, noted their seasonal blooms, and saw in them a grander tale of intertwined lives, of competition, but also of support. Every tiny detail was a puzzle piece. Samuel, with the jeweler's patience, laid them together. His reputation grew, yet Samuel stayed the same. Visiting scholars from New York expected a proud scientist. They found instead a simple man, worn shirt, bright eyes, gentle voice, who listened more than he spoke, questioned more than he proclaimed. He received hundreds of letters, from Buffalo students to New Orleans teachers, and replied to each, his handwriting as careful as a sparrow sketch. "I do not claim to know it all," he wrote. "I only watch and record." That humility was no pretense. It was his backbone, the reason he did not falter before accusations or acclaim. Yet that acclaim continued to spread. At Harvard, Samuel's theory became a course, still debated, but taught. In Chicago, journalists hailed him a hero, though he shunned the title. In San Francisco, a publisher translated his book into Spanish, sending his ideas beyond borders. Samuel could not know every place his words reached, but he felt their pulse like water flowing along Mirror Lane. He did not set out to change the world. He only sought to understand it, and in that understanding, the world had already changed. Eliza, though she still worried for his soul, grew proud. She read his books, not merely to agree, but to see him, the man she loved, on each page. His father, though never speaking praise, sent a short letter. "You have followed your own path." It was the closest thing to reconciliation Samuel would receive, But reconciliation was not what he sought. He sought truth, and truth, like the Charles, never stops flowing. One day, as Samuel walked Mirror Lane, a letter arrived from Worcester bearing news of a new discovery, fossils in Pennsylvania that might bolster his theory. But the news came with a challenge. A group of Boston scholars urged Samuel to write another book, not just on nature, but on humanity's place in life's dance. Would Samuel dare to touch that question, or would he let it rest, like his quiet path beside the river of Concord? In the oak-paneled room in Concord, Massachusetts in 1885, an old armchair groaned beneath the weight of Samuel Harrow. Now 40 years old, he was no longer the wiry youth who had stood on the Starling's deck. His hair was streaked with silver, his face carved by time and countless oil lamp nights. Yet his eyes, though weary, still shone like the night he first discovered that beetle beneath his desk. The notebooks stacked on his desk, filled with tiny handwriting and painstaking sketches, proved that the flame within Samuel had never died. On the Origin of Life, the book that had rocked America a decade ago, now formed the bedrock of science. But Samuel pressed on, writing not to persuade, but to explore, like a jeweler endlessly refining an uncut gem. Concord had changed. The church no longer branded Samuel a heretic. Those who once burned his books now read them in secret. The townsfolk, from blacksmiths to weavers, looked upon him with guarded respect, as one might regard a man who had weathered the storm and returned. Eliza, his wife, had become the household's pillar. She managed letters from everywhere, from Boston, Chicago, even San Francisco, where scientists and students sought advice or offered thanks. Their 3 children, raised among ink and journals, often sat beside Samuel, listening as he recounted stories of Florida Keys sparrows or Charles River grasses, as if hearing a fairy tale. Samuel did not rest. His health had waned under years of mental toil, forcing him to sit more than stroll. Yet his mind still roamed, like the starling on open waters. He wrote of the overlooked, a new book, On the Friends Beneath the Soil, told of earthworms in the Hudson Valley, how they quietly enrich the soil, shaping the world millimeter by millimeter. Many laughed, believing a great scientist should not concern himself with worms. But Samuel saw in them a grander truth. Even the tiniest creatures have roles in life's dance. Nothing is mundane, he wrote, his script unhurried as a measured breath. He still walked Mirror Lane, the dirt path by the Charles, though more slowly than before. There he observed and recorded as in his youth. He studied pigeon mating habits, watched wildflowers bloom with the seasons, searched for the invisible threads linking all life. He knew nothing of later discoveries, blood's mysteries, cellular wonders, but he felt them, as one on the shore senses the ocean's depths. Letters from Nathan Wells in Salem and Lydia Morse in Worcester brought news of new fossils and plants that reinforced his theory. Samuel replied, always encouraging and inquisitive, as though still the boy beneath the desk, curious about everything. Samuel's reputation now spanned far beyond Concord. At Harvard, students learned his theory as if it were their alphabet. In New York, publishers reprinted his works, sending them to Mexico and Canada. In San Francisco, a scientific society named an award in his honor. Yet Samuel paid it no heed. He refused the title Great Scientist, calling himself merely a recorder of nature. When reporters visited Concord seeking a hero, they found a humble man, shirt threadbare, eyes bright but voice low, sitting at his desk, sharing tea with Eliza, and speaking of earthworms. "I only observe," he said with a smile, "and write what I see." His relationship with Eliza, once strained by her faith, had become a gentle current. She did not embrace all his ideas, but she cherished their sincerity. They raised their children together. They laughed. They faced Samuel's headaches, now more frequent, side by side. His father, William, had died in 1880, leaving a brief letter. "You have walked the path I dared not tread." Samuel kept that letter in his desk drawer beside his very first Starling notebook. It was not a triumph, but a small reconciliation, yet enough. Samuel's legacy was more than books. It was the way he taught the world to look, not with pride, but with curiosity, not with answers, but with questions. In Chicago, a teacher used his works to teach children about grasses. In New Orleans, a young scientist sought fossils, inspired by Samuel's notes. In Concord, children played by the Charles, clutching stones and feathers, pretending to be old Harrow, as they'd heard in tales. Samuel never learned all their stories, but he felt their pulse, like the waves that once rocked the Starling. One day, as the oil lamp waned, Samuel received a letter from a buffalo scientist reporting a new bird species in the White Mountains, one that might reshape his theory. Samuel's hand trembled with age. He smiled. He opened a fresh notebook and wrote the first line. Yet his health, like the lamp nearing its last drop of oil, was fading. Would Samuel have time to write the final chapter of his tale, or would his legacy live on through those who continued to ask the questions he had first dared to pose? In a small wooden house deep in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley in 1850, candlelight flickered across rough-hewn walls like whispering spirits. This place was called the House of Prophecy, not for its plain exterior like any other Staunton home, but for the woman who lived within. Nora Clay, a widow in her 40s, black hair streaked with silver, eyes sharp as razors. Not a queen, not a scholar, merely a former weaver. Yet, seated on an old wooden chair, her hand clutching a bundle of scorched herbs, she drew townspeople from all across Virginia, from Richmond to Roanoke, kneeling at her door to hear words that might change their fate. Staunton, a small town nestled among dirt roads and forges, believed the House of Prophecy to be where earth and sky converged. Long before Nora's arrival, legend told of a young girl, abandoned in the Shenandoah woods, who heard voices from the ground and was led to a hidden rocky ravine. She did not survive, but her words, like wind, continued to echo. The people built a wooden house over that ravine, and through generations, women were chosen, not for power, but for quiet strength of spirit, to become the seer, bringing the voice of the invisible into the world. Nora did not choose this path. It chose her. 20 years earlier, when her husband, the town blacksmith, died in an accident, the people found her before the ravine, eyes vacant, murmuring unintelligible words. They led her to the House of Prophecy, not to imprison her, but to listen. From that day, Nora became the seer. her words not her own, but those of a force greater, as though Mother Earth borrowed her voice to speak. Farmers and merchants alike came, bearing questions. Should I sell my land? Will my child survive the winter? Nora offered no clear answers. Her words were riddles, drifting like smoke through the wooden slats, full of meaning, yet elusive. Each month, on the full moon, Nora performed her ritual. She bathed in the town's cold stream, its chill a reminder of humility. She fasted, sat in silent meditation on the wooden floor, clad in a simple linen gown, no jewelry, no crown. When the townspeople gathered, she took her place on the old chair, bundle of scorched herbs in hand, smoke coiling like silk drapes. Her voice, usually gentle, now trembled and soared, as if not her voice at all. A horse will falter when the lamp dies, she whispered to a farmer asking about his fields. A crimson cloud will cloak the plains, she warned a merchant about his cargo. Her words were never direct commands. They were mirrors reflecting each listener's hopes and fears, compelling them to peer into their own hearts. Some left confused, others angry, but most returned, bearing new questions, like birds circling back to their nest. The House of Prophecy was not merely a temple of foresight. It was Staunton's beating heart, shaping every decision. A landowner from Richmond, on the brink of selling his estate, came to Nora and heard, "The earth will weep if gold changes hands." He refrained from selling. That year's harvest saved his family. A mother in Roanoke, fearing for her sick child, was told, "The sun will cradle the darkness." She believed, and her child lived. The seer's words were not orders. They were reflections, urging people to see their own power. Nora kept nothing for herself. She lived simply, on cornbread and spring water. She refused the riches wealthy visitors offered. Staunton's people defended her, not with swords, but with reverence. They called her the seer. She only smiled and said, "I only listen and speak." Yet no one knew what truly happened when she sat on that chair, smoke swirling around her. Some whispered that the ravine beneath the house breathed strange mists, opening her mind. Others believed she was the bridge to an ancient, nameless power that dwelled forever in Shenandoah's soil. Nora's power lay not only in her words, it lay in her ability to unite Staunton. Merchants shared profits after her counsel. Farmers helped one another through lean seasons, trusting in her guidance. The House of Prophecy, though small, was the town's heart, where every story, from joy to sorrow, found a listening ear. But even a heart can tremble. In 1860, when the shadow of Civil War crept into Virginia, strangers from Richmond arrived, not to seek advice, but to seize control. They intended to use Nora's prophecies for their own ends. Would the House of Prophecy remain sacred, or become a weapon in hands that did not understand the earth's true voice? In a hushed moment in 1830, amidst the dusty dirt roads of Staunton, Virginia, Nora Clay stood before a small crowd, clutching a freshly woven bolt of cloth still smelling of grasses. She was 20 years old, a newlywed weaver, with a gentle smile and nimble fingers. The townspeople had come to buy fabric, unaware that this young woman, with eyes as deep as a well, would become the seer. the bearer of prophecies from the hidden ravine beneath the house of prophecy. Nora's journey to that old wooden chair was not driven by ambition, but by destiny, a silent summons impossible to resist, like a song rising from the heart of the Shenandoah earth. Becoming the seer was not an honor bestowed. It was a burden chosen by those women who sought no power, but possessed stillness in their souls, like a mirror-smooth lake. Nora did not know this when she was young, her life revolving around the loom and the Roanoke market. But after her husband, a blacksmith, died in an accident in 1840, she changed. The people of Staunton told of finding her wandering near that hidden ravine, dressed in dew-soaked skirts, murmuring words no one understood. Not madness, but awakening. With reverent fear, they brought her to the house of prophecy. There, an elderly widow seer looked upon her and said, "The earth has chosen you." The preparation was no gentle rite. Nora lived in solitude within that wooden house. She learned to listen, not with ears, but with her soul. Each day she bathed in the town's cold stream, the water biting her skin as a reminder she belonged to more than herself. She fasted before each ceremony, seated on the wooden floor, eyes closed, her mind drifting like a leaf on the James River. She wore simple white linen, no jewelry, no color, like blank parchment awaiting ink. The elders of Staunton, the recorders, taught her how to hold the scorched herb bundle, how the smoke should guide her mind. "Do not seek the words," they warned. "Let the words find you." The prophetic ritual took place each full moon in a small chamber beneath the house of prophecy. The ravine lay hidden under the floorboards. Nora sat on the old chair, her bare feet touching the earth, her hand gripping the charred herbs. Thick, sweet smoke curled around her like a veil, dimming the candlelight on the walls. The townspeople stood outside the door, hearing only whispers. They saw only her shadow through the slats. Yet within that room, something extraordinary occurred. Nora's breathing slowed. Her eyes flew open, fixed not on any person, but on a place unseen by all. Her voice, usually soft as a breeze, now rose in jagged, soaring bursts, as though another power spoke through her lips. "The wheel will break when the hill sings," she intoned, answering a farmer's question about the crops. "The light will shatter before the gate opens," she murmured, replying to a mother's worry for her child. No one knew precisely what drove Nora into such trances. The recorders stood close, noting every utterance, offering no explanation, only preservation. Some believed the ravine under the house exhaled strange vapors, a force from Shenandoah's heart that unlocked her mind. Others said it was an ancient, nameless power dwelling in Virginia's soil long before humans arrived. Nora herself never spoke of it. When the ceremony ended, she returned to herself, exhausted, eyes dim as though having traveled a great distance. She ate cornbread, drank spring water, and refused to describe what she had seen. "I do not know," she whispered, voice barely audible. "I only listen." Nora's prophetic states were no charade. The people of Staunton, from blacksmiths to merchants, felt power in her words, not because they were clear, but because they forced listeners to confront themselves. A father, hearing "the wolf will sleep when the lamp comes," kept his son from a dangerous journey, and the boy survived. A landowner, hearing "the door will close when gold falls," refused to sell his land, and discovered a coal seam. Her prophecies were not commands. They were mirrors reflecting each soul's hopes and fears. But those mirrors were not always revered. In 1860, as the shadow of civil war crept across Virginia, a group of strangers from Richmond, clad in black, their eyes cold, arrived at the House of Prophecy. They did not come to seek counsel. They sought to control her gift. They wanted Nora to speak their words, to guide soldiers, to win their war. Nora, seated on her wooden chair, looked at them, not in fear, but with heavy heart. Could she preserve the purity of the earth's voice, or would that power be warped and wielded as a weapon in a world tearing itself apart? Along the red dirt road of Staunton, Virginia, in 1861, shadows of men in black coats stretched long across the ground like sharpened blades ready to sever fate. They called themselves the Midnight League, hailing from Richmond. They brought no questions of harvest or health, but war maps and cold intent. Civil war had torn Virginia in two. These men sought to make Nora Clay's prophecies, those sacred utterances from the House of Prophecy, a banner to guide the Confederacy through fire and blood. Nora, her black hair flecked with silver, her hands once weaving cloth now gripping a bundle of scorched herbs, stood before them. In her worn white linen, shoulders frayed, her eyes deep as the James River's bed. Not to kneel, but to guard an ancient secret. The House of Prophecy, a small wooden dwelling nestled in the Shenandoah Valley, was more than a sanctuary of foresight. It was Staunton's beacon, shaping every choice from commerce to conflict by Nora's riddles. Folks from Harrisonburg's carpenters to Norfolk's traders believed her words, like a tether between earth and sky, could pierce the veil of tomorrow. But Nora, with a mind as keen as a Roanoke blacksmith's blade, knew her power did not lie in clarity. She spoke in enigmas, like smoke curling over water, guiding seekers to find their own path. A farmer in Lynchburg, asking of his fields, heard, "The meadow will bloom when the hawk's shadow stills." He kept his land, and his crops fed his family. A wife in Winchester, fearing for her soldier husband, was told, "The arrow shall fall when the evening star rises." She prayed, and he returned alive. Her prophecies were not commands. They were mirrors reflecting each listener's soul, forcing them to confront themselves. The recorders, the elders flanking Nora, did more than transcribe her words. They were her unseen watchmen, listening from Staunton's market stalls to Richmond's taverns, knowing who came to the House of Prophecy and why. When the Midnight League arrived, the recorders had warned her, whispering of men in black who sought to turn her gift into a weapon. Thaddeus Gray, an officer with a voice as heavy as granite, stepped forward on the dirt road, map in hand. "Speak that our troops shall march through Fredericksburg undefeated." Nora met his gaze, unflinching, grip tightening on the scorched herbs as though holding the very heartbeat of Shenandoah's earth. She made no promise. She merely invited them to the full moon ritual. That night, Nora sat on the old wooden chair beneath the House of Prophecy, bare feet on the cold floor, the smoldering bundle in her hand. Sweet, dense smoke wound around her, obscuring the League's officers at the doorway. Staunton's villagers, gathered outside, held their breath, hearing only her voice drift forth. Nora's tone, usually soft as a mountain stream, rose sharp and otherworldly. The guns will fall silent when the banner ceases to fly, yet the earth will not shield the one who steps astray. Thaddeus's face hardened, craving a clear decree, a guarantee of victory. But Nora, weaving riddles as deftly as cloth, spoke without binding herself, preserving the house of prophecy's neutrality, belonging neither to confederacy nor union. That neutrality proved Nora's double-edged blade. As Virginia smoldered in battle, the house of prophecy stood unscathed, a lighthouse untouched by war. Leaders from both sides, Union generals in Winchester to Confederate captains in Petersburg, sought her counsel. A commander from Norfolk asked, "Will our port hold?" Nora replied, "The harbor stands when waves relent." He fortified his defenses, and he prevailed. A Richmond general inquired, "Shall we claim the valley?" She said, "The valley sleeps when smoke ascends." He struck too hastily, and he was defeated. Her prophecies chose no side. They illuminated paths, keeping Staunton an oasis amid the embattled land. Nora's influence reached beyond the battlefield. She wove unity in Staunton. Traders shared goods with the poor after her counsel. Farmers aided neighbors through lean seasons, trusting her riddles. The house of prophecy, though small as a seed, was the town's heart, where all, from weavers to soldiers, found hope. Yet that hope was not immortal. The recorders, hair gray and footsteps slow, feared the war would engulf the house of prophecy. Thaddeus Gray, dissatisfied with riddles, whispered in Richmond's power corridors. They no longer wanted her prophecies. They wanted Nora herself. And if they could not have her willingly, they would seize the house of prophecy by force. One night, as Nora sat on her wooden chair, smoke curling about her, a new prophecy echoed only for her ears. The door will shut when the earth falls silent. The words struck her like a frigid blade. She shivered. Could the house of prophecy stand against the winds of war, or would it be drawn into darkness, where her voice ceased to light the way and became a chain instead? On the packed earth floor of a small house in Staunton, Virginia, in 1865, an old wooden chair stood silent, a witness to days gone by. The house of prophecy, once a beacon lighting the Shenandoah Valley, had become but a fading shadow, breathing of decay. The Civil War had left Virginia scarred, barren fields, red dirt roads stained with blood, shattered dreams. Nora Clay, now past 50, her hair white as October mist, still wore simple linen. Her hands, once gripping scorched herbs, now slowly caressed an ancient loom. Her prophecies, once guiding farmers through famine and generals through gun smoke, had fallen silent, like a song swept away by the wind. This decline did not come in flames or battle. It seeped in like a crack in fine china through years of brutal warfare. The Midnight League from Richmond, with threats and war maps, had once sought to weaponize Nora's prophecies. But Nora, with a heart steadfast as Lynchburg's stones, refused. She kept that sacred voice unclaimed by Confederacy or Union, a choice that shattered her isolation. The people of Staunton, who had gathered each full moon for her riddles, drifted away, fleeing artillery or losing faith. The recorders, those elders who had penned her words, one by one fell away. Their dusty leather journals now sat on a shelf in a Roanoke church. The house of prophecy, once echoing with earth's and sky's voice, now heard only the creak of its loom. Nora ceased her prophecies. In 1863, after one full moon ritual, she rose from the chair. The smoke of scorched herbs faded, and she declared, "The earth has slept." The townspeople, waiting outside the door, stood stunned. Some wept. Others turned away, believing she had abandoned them. Yet Nora, with eyes deep as the Potomac's currents, returned to her loom, weaving cloth as in her youth. The house of prophecy unlocked its door, yet its rituals halted. No more scorched herbs, no more riddles. The chair, once the center of oracles, remained an old relic in the corner, like an aged friend who tells no tales. The war had ended, but Staunton did not revive. Dirt roads still bore soldiers' wagon ruts. Homes stood quiet without laughter. The house of prophecy, once where farmers and traders found hope, had become a fading memory. People, from Harrisonburg's weavers to Norfolk's landowners, no longer brought questions. They spoke of Nora's past riddles, how they saved lives and land, but as of a distant dream. Some believed the ravine beneath the floor had stopped breathing, that Shenandoah's ancient power had departed. Others whispered that by falling silent, Nora had shielded her gift from war's defilement, like a mother hiding treasure from a storm. Nora remained in Staunton, living quietly. She wove cloth, shared cornbread with children, taught them to listen, not to earth, but to their own hearts. The townspeople no longer called her the seer, yet they still came bearing wildflowers or stories, as though to reconnect with the past. Her leather-bound journals, holding prophecies across generations, rested in a small Winchester church, where scholars from Richmond sometimes turned fading pages, seeking meaning in her riddles like panning for gold in sand. The house of prophecy, though silent, burned softly in the memories of all who once heard Nora speak. Such memories do not fade. A new generation in Staunton grew up retelling tales of Nora as one recounts a star that never sets. A boy in Roanoke, inspired by his grandmother's stories, drew Nora's likeness on paper, calling her the keeper of the earth's words. A girl in Lynchburg penned a poem, dubbing the house of prophecy the home of undying riddles. In Petersburg, a historian rediscovered Nora's journals, published them, extending her name to places she never knew. The old wooden house, though just a relic, lived on in stories, like a river flowing on though its banks have changed. Nora, now slowed by age, spoke little of earlier days. She sat by her loom, hands trembling, yet her eyes lit as if she still heard the earth whisper. Staunton's residents visited, bearing cornbread or scraps of cloth, hoping to rekindle that bond with the past. One day, a boy with lantern-bright eyes asked, "Do you still hear the earth, grandmother?" Nora smiled, voice soft as smoke. "The earth always sings, if you learn to be still." Those words, a final riddle, left the boy speechless, clutching the scrap of cloth Nora gave him. Yet memory, however lasting, cannot alone ward off fresh dangers. A group from Richmond, dressed in new suits and harboring grand designs, came to Staunton, seeing the House of Prophecy as a useless relic. They planned to tear it down, build warehouses for post-war commerce. The townspeople, recalling Nora's legacy, protested, but their voices waned before money and power. Could the House of Prophecy endure in story alone? Or would it be erased, leaving Nora's memory to echo in empty air? On the cobblestone square of Independence, Missouri, in 1840, a heavy ox-drawn wagon creaked along, its wooden wheels biting into the newly laid red bricks. These roads, stretching from Missouri to Oregon, were more than passages. They were the lifeblood of the American dream, called the Red Brick Road, linking small towns like Independence to distant horizons in the Northwest. Thousands, farmers, blacksmiths, traders, trudged their length, bearing hopes, fears, and tales that would shape a nation. Just as Nora Clay's House of Prophecy bound Staunton with her oracles, the red bricks connected America with dust, sweat, and resolve. The Red Brick Road was no accident. As America pushed westward, muddy tracks could not carry the dreams of millions. President Andrew Jackson, vision as sharp as an axe, ordered durable thoroughfares not merely for passage, but as a declaration. America was more than an idea. It was a unified entity from east to west. Engineers led by Amos Reed of St. Louis charted straight lines, ignoring hills and rivers as if to challenge Earth itself. From Independence, the bricks stretched past Kansas City, through Nebraska, to Oregon City, over 3,000 miles, binding scattered dreams into a grand narrative. Building was no easy task. Amos Reed, with peppered hair and hands calloused like stone, led surveyors wielding tape and compass, measuring each mile. They dug deep, laid fired Missouri bricks, each one a promise. Rivers like the Platte and Snake yielded to their wooden bridges. Nebraska's marshes were filled with Kansas earth, each wagon load a small victory. Labor fell to many: Illinois farmers, Kentucky miners, Boston immigrants. Each shovel turn a step toward the future. When finished, the Red Brick Road was more than a road. It was a symbol, a statement that young America could shape its land by sheer will. These roads carried more than wagons. They carried life. Traders from St. Louis rolled barrels of whiskey, yards of cloth, and knives westward in exchange for furs in Oregon. Families from Ohio, with patched quilts and dreams of new land, slogged through Nebraska, their wheels sinking into red dust. Riders galloped like the wind, delivering mail from Independence to Sacramento in weeks instead of months. Every mile marked by stone milestones etched with town names, Liberty, Kearney, Laramie, reminded travelers that each step led to something greater. All roads lead to Oregon, they said. Not a metaphor, but truth, with independence at the heart of every dream. The Red Brick Road did more than connect. It shaped. In Nebraska, towns like Scotts Bluff sprang up around rest stations where travelers shared news and stories. In Wyoming, settlers built homes, turning prairies into villages. In Oregon, wheat fields rose from Missouri seeds. The road brought law from Washington, letters from kin, and faith from ministers who walked from Kansas to Idaho clutching Bibles. These were not mere paths. They were threads weaving a vast America, from small towns like Independence to ports on the Pacific. Yet the road did not judge. It carried hope, but also sorrow. Immigrants, worn and spent, left shallow graves along Nebraska's edge. Mail riders, robbed in Wyoming, fell, their letters scattering on red bricks. Native tribes, from Kansas to Oregon, watched as their lands were pierced by horse hooves. The road, though steadfast, offered no promise of safety, only opportunity, a double-edged blade delivering both life and loss. Amos Reed, who drew the red brick road, did not live to see its completion. He fell in Laramie, map still clenched in his hand, yet his legacy endured. The roads, with bricks as lasting as stone, became America's spine, carrying millions across plains and mountains to unseen futures. In Independence, a stone monument bearing Amos's name stands silent, a reminder that these roads were not just brick, but dreams built on sweat and faith. But dreams, however grand, are not eternal. As the 19th century waned, the red brick road faced new trials. Steam locomotives, swifter than wagons, began racing across Kansas. New towns like Denver rose, drawing life away from old way stations. Could the red brick road remain America's lifeblood, or would it become a memory, like Nora's house of prophecy, alive only in the stories of those who once traveled its red brick path? When the red dust from the red brick road settled, and Nora Clay's loom fell silent, Staunton and Independence still told tales of those who dared to dream, dared to step forward, and dared to listen. The house of prophecy, though threatened with erasure, remained a spark in the hearts of children in Roanoke who drew pictures of Nora. The red brick road, though masked by the shadow of steam locomotives, remained the heartbeat of wagons rolling across Nebraska, carrying the American dream all the way to Oregon. These legacies, of prophecy and red bricks, are more than history. They are mirrors reflecting courage, connection, and the stories we tell to remember who we are. From Shenandoah to Missouri, every footstep, every whispered word is a thread linking us to those who came before. From Staunton's farmers to Independence's travelers. If this story moves you, let it live on. Hit like to keep Nora's fire burning. Share to bring the red brick road to loved ones across America, from Richmond to Portland, from Lynchburg to Sacramento. Subscribe to join us in uncovering more memories, more untold roads. And you, where are you watching from? Leave a comment. Tell us where you stand, where your heart connects to these tales. Together, we do more than remember. We weave a new history, one sentence, one step at a time.